hold of. When we came back, nothing would serve him but he must read us the poems he had been speaking of, and Miss Pole encouraged him in his proposal, I thought, because she wished me to hear his beautiful reading, of which she had boasted; but she afterwards said it was because she had got to a difficult part of her crochet, and wanted to count her stitches without having to talk. Whatever he had proposed would have been right to Miss Matty, although she did fall sound asleep within 5 minutes after he had begun reading a long poem, called Locksley Hall, and had a comfortable nap, unobserved, till he ended, when the cessation of his voice wakened her up, and she said, feeling that something was expected, and that Miss Pole was counting, "What a pretty book!" "Pretty, madam! It's beautiful! Pretty, indeed!" "Oh, yes, I meant beautiful," said she, fluttered at his disapproval of her word. "It is so like that beautiful poem of Dr Johnson's my sister used to read. I forget the name of it. What was it, my dear?" turning to me. "Which do you mean, ma'am? What was it about?" "I don't remember what it was about, and I've quite forgotten what the name of it was; but it was written by Dr Johnson, and was very beautiful, and very like what Mr Holbrook has just been reading." "I don't remember it," said he, reflectively; "but I don't know Dr Johnson's poems well. I must read them." As we were getting into the fly to return, I heard Mr Holbrook say he should call on the ladies soon, and inquire how they got home; and this evidently pleased and fluttered Miss Matty at the time he said it; but after we had lost sight of the old house among the trees, her sentiments towards the master of it were gradually absorbed into a distressing wonder as to whether Martha had broken her word, and seized on the opportunity of her mistress's absence to have a follower. Martha looked good and steady and composed enough, as she came to help us out. She was always careful of Miss Matty, and to-night she made use of this unlucky speech. "Ah, dear ma'am, to think of your going out in an evening in such a thin shawl! It's no better than muslin. At your age, ma'am, you should be careful." "My age!" said Miss Matty, almost speaking crossly for her, for she was usually gentle. "My age! Why, how old do you think I am, that you talk about my age?" "Well, ma'am, I should say you were not far short of 60, but folks's looks is often against them, and I'm sure I meant no harm." "Martha! I'm not yet 52," said Miss Matty, with grave emphasis, for probably the last remembrance of her youth had come very vividly before her this day, and she was annoyed at finding that golden time so far away in the past. But she never spoke of any former and more intimate acquaintance with Mr Holbrook. She had probably met with so little sympathy in her early love, that she had shut it up close in her heart, and it was only by a sort of watching, which I could hardly avoid since Miss Pole's confidence, that I saw how faithful her poor heart had been in its sorrow and its silence. She gave me some good reason for wearing her best cap every day, and sat near the window, in spite of her rheumatism, in order to see, without being seen, down into the street. He came. He put his open palms upon his knees, which were far apart, as he sat with his head bent down, whistling, after we had replied to his inquiries about our safe return. Suddenly he jumped up. "Well, madam, have you any commands for Paris? I am going there in a week or two." "To Paris!" we both exclaimed. "Yes, madam, I have never been there before, and always had a wish to go, and I think if I don't go soon, I mayn't go at all; so as soon as the hay is got in I shall go, before harvest time." We were so much astonished that we had no commissions. Just as he was going out of the room he turned back with his favourite exclamation, "God bless my soul, madam, but I nearly forgot half my errand. Here are the poems for you admired so much the other evening at my house." He tugged away at a parcel in his coat pocket. "Good-bye, miss," and "Good-bye, Matty, take care of yourself," and he was gone. But he had given her a book, and he had called her Matty, just as he used to do 30 years ago. "I wish he would not go to Paris," said Miss Matilda, anxiously. "I don't believe frogs will agree with him; he used to have to be very careful with what he ate, which was curious in so strong-looking a young man." Soon after this I took my leave, giving many an injunction to Martha to look after her mistress, and to let me know if she thought that Miss Matilda was not so well, in which case I would volunteer a visit to my old friend, without noticing Martha's intelligence to her. Accordingly I received a line or two from Martha every now and then, and about November I had a note to say her mistress was very low and sadly off her food, and the account made me so uneasy, that although Martha did not decidedly summon me, I packed up my things and went. I received a warm welcome, in spite of the little flurry produced by my impromptu visit, for I had only been able to give a day's notice. Miss Matilda looked miserably ill, and I prepared to comfort and cosset her. I went down to have a private talk with Martha. "How long has your mistress been so poorly?" I asked, as I stood by the kitchen fire. "Well, I think it's better than a fortnight it is. I know it was one Tuesday, after Miss Pole had been, that she went into this moping way. I thought she was tired, and it would go off with a night's rest; but no, she has gone on and on ever since, till I thought it my duty to write to you, ma'am." "You did quite right, Martha. It is a comfort to think she has so faithful a servant about her. And I hope you find your place comfortable?" "Well, ma'am, missus is very kind, and there's plenty to eat and drink, and no more work but what I can do easily; but—" Martha hesitated. "But what, Martha?" "Why, it seems so hard of missus not to let me have any followers. There's such lots of young fellows in the town, and many a one has offered to keep company with me, and I may never be in such a likely place again, and it's wasting an opportunity. Many a girl as I know would have 'em unbeknownst to missus, but I've given my word, and I'll stick to it, or else this is just the house for missus never to be the wiser, if they did come; and it's such a capable kitchen, there's such dark corners in it, I'd be bound to hide any one. I counted up last Sunday night, for I'll not deny I was crying because I had to shut the door in Jem Hearn's face, and he's a steady young man, fit for any girl, only I had given missus my word." Martha was all but crying again, and I had little comfort to give her, for I knew, from old experience, of the horror with which both the Miss Jenkyns looked upon followers, and in Miss Matty's present nervous state this dread was not likely to be lessened. I went to see Miss Pole the next day, and took her completely by surprise, for she had not been to see Miss Matilda for 2 days. "And now I must go back with you, my dear, for I promised to let her know how Thomas Holbrook went on; and I'm sorry to say his housekeeper has sent me word to-day that he hasn't long to live. Poor Thomas! That journey to Paris was quite too much for him. His housekeeper says he has hardly ever been round his fields since, but just sits with his hands on his knees in the counting-house, not reading or anything, but only saying what a wonderful city Paris was. Paris has much to answer for if it's killed my cousin Thomas, for a better man never lived." "Does Miss Matilda know of his illness?" asked I, a new light as to the cause of her indisposition dawning upon me. "Dear! to be sure, yes. Has she not told you? I let her know a fortnight ago, or more, when I first heard of it. How odd she shouldn't have told you!" Not at all, I thought, but I did not say anything. I felt almost guilty of having spied too curiously into that tender heart, and I was not going to speak of its secrets, hidden, Miss Matty believed, from all the world. I ushered Miss Pole into Miss Matilda's little drawing-room, and then left them alone. But I was not surprised when Martha came to my bedroom door, to ask me to go down to dinner alone, for that missus had one of her bad headaches. She came into the drawing-room at tea-time, but it was evidently an effort to her, and as if to make up for some reproachful feeling against her late sister, Miss Jenkyns, which had been troubling her all the afternoon, and for which she now felt penitent, she kept telling me how good and how clever Deborah was in her youth, and how she used to settle what gowns they were to wear at all the parties, faint ghostly ideas of grim parties, far away in the distance, when Miss Matty and Miss Pole were young, and how Deborah and her mother had started the Benefit Society for the Poor, and taught girls cooking and plain sewing, and how Deborah had once danced with a lord, and how she used to visit Sir Peter Arley's, and tried to remodel the quiet rectory establishment on the plans of Arley Hall, where they kept 30 servants, and how she had nursed Miss Matty through a long, long illness, of which I had never heard before, but which I now dated in my own mind as following the dismissal of the suit of Mr Holbrook. So we talked softly and quietly of old times through the long November evening. The next day Miss Pole brought us word that Mr Holbrook was dead. Miss Matty heard the news in silence; in fact, from the account of the previous day, it was only what we had to expect. Miss Pole kept calling upon us, for some expression of regret, asking if it was not sad that he was gone, and saying, "To think of that pleasant day last June, when he seemed so well! And he might have lived this dozen years if he had not gone to that wicked Paris, where they are always having revolutions." She paused for some demonstration on our part. I saw Miss Matty could not speak; she was trembling so nervously, so I said what I really felt, and after a call of some duration, all the time of which I have no doubt Miss Pole thought Miss Matty received the news very calmly, our visitor took her leave. Miss Matty made a strong effort to conceal her feelings, a concealment she practised even with me, for she has never alluded to Mr Holbrook again, although the book he gave her lies with her Bible on the little table by her bedside. She did not think I heard her when she asked the little milliner of Cranford to make her cap something like the Honourable Miss Jamieson's, or that I noticed the reply, "But she wears widows' caps, ma'am." "Oh, I only meant something in that style—not